Whoops. No matter how many times it happens, always make sure to never learn your lesson. No matter what happens, never learn your lesson. Never learn your lesson, no matter what happens. Alright, here's the hot cheese. Oh, 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 yikes. Look how cool my hair looks when you can see so through it. When you can see so through it, that's when it looks neat. Well, it's nice and cool and stringy to my forehead. Right. Right. Good news. The good news is that you have been listening to a cool thing. Here is the cool amp. Look at that AC30. It's such a motherfucking cool amp. Oh, it's a Korg. It's a Korg made AC30. I'm so cool for owning it. And I forget that it sounds good. Sounds good when you play fuzz pedals through it. And that's something I hope I don't forget again. And I've been playing fuzzes through my amp. Here are some other fuzzes that I played tonight. I played a 2000s Big Muff, and it sounded fine. And then I also played an FC2 Hyperfuzz. Yes, I also played that, and it sounded amazing. In a fight, I would choose the Hyperfuzz to win. In a fight against a Big Muff from any time or of production. And because I am a cool guy with amazing taste, I also played a Clone KTR and a Blues Driver, a totally stock unmodded Blues Driver with through-hole components. What guitar did I play? US. I played a Gibson L6-S. Here it is, the Gibson L6-S of death. Yes, I played the Gibson L6-S of death. Death, death. Gibson L6-S of death. And it's a cool guitar to play, especially with the fuzzes. And here's why. When you see a Gibson L6-S of death or otherwise, do not be fooled. This is not a baritone. No, it's a 6-position pickup selector. But of course mine is wired. Oh, kinda wrong, is it? But I think you're getting to basically how it works. It's a recreation of the stock electronics. Just buy it backwards, so I'll say which position does what in regards to the pickups. But you should expect, I think, the positions to be flip-flops. Without further ado, here they are. Position 6. Both pickups together in series. Position 5. That one is the neck position. Position 4. How about both pickups in parallel? Position 3. Oh my fucking god, that's one of 2 out of phase opposites. Position 2. Bridge pickup by itself. In position 1, a second and noticeably different out of phase option. This is why this guitar rules with fuzz. Because when you are stacking pedals and the gain is too much, sometimes it rules not to just turn down the volume. It is also cool to choose a pickup position that has less information coming from the guitar. Ooh, such as an out of phase. And by less information, I mean less frequencies coming through the pickups. These pickups. What do you mean less information? I'm so glad you asked. Imagine that you're playing a guitar out of phase through a clean amp. You'll notice that the pickups sound weak, and your overall volume most likely is decreased. Yeah, yeah, that's what I mean by less information. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Do the same thing when you're trying to end the world by stacking fuzz and distortion. When you're really trying to literally kill God with a wall of chaos and death. If it starts to feel like too much of a mud puddle, and that's when I would suggest put your out of phase pickups to the test, to the test. Of course, use your volume control on the guitar as well. Oh, but I forgot. Which fuzz were you hearing most of all? Don't poop your pants. And the zimming in that. It's a super early fuzz factory. Why do I say it was super early? Because look, you can see the paint sitting on the enclosure. Because there is no indicator light. And also because there's no external power source. You can only use your internal power source. Unless you have a dongle. Get yourself a dongle. The other way that I know that it's an early one is that, well, it's labeled and dated. Look at that. And this one is all the way from 1998. Serial number is Z082, which I would take that to mean, 82nd ever made? Pretty wacky to have one of the first 100 fuzz factories of all time. You know, Lorcan Sab Scrobe.